What does it actually take to bring down a centuries-old democracy? Imagine the fate of the entire known world just hanging in the balance, right on the edge of a blade. Two massive, ancient fleets are facing each other across the open water at dawn. Banners flying in the wind, the tension just absolutely frozen moments before the battle begins. On one side, you've got a cold, calculating young Roman. On the other, Rome's greatest living general, fighting right alongside the brilliant Queen of Egypt. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a monumental conflict, a clash that didn't just end lives, but literally destroyed Roman democratic traditions and birthed an empire that echoes through history.
But before we get into how this whole conflict even started, I want you to picture this shocking moment right in the middle of the fighting. The seas are churning, these heavy warships are slamming into each other, and the air is thick with smoke from fire missiles. Suddenly, the Queen's royal flagship breaks away from the chaotic battle line and just sails south. Seeing this, the great Roman commander makes a split-second decision that will forever define his legacy. He abandons his own fiercely loyal fleet, men who are actively fighting, bleeding, and dying for him, hops on a smaller ship and chases after her into the open sea. It's the ultimate moment of personal betrayal. His soldiers are left completely leaderless. So how in the world did it come to this?
Well, let's dive into Section 1, the power vacuum and the death of Caesar. To really understand how we got to that burning naval battle, we've got to rewind a bit to 44 BC. Caesar has just been assassinated, and the Republic is plunged headfirst into total chaos. It is honestly incredible to see just how fast a centuries-old republic can completely collapse into an autocracy. Starting with Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, it takes just over a decade to see the seeds of treason planted at the donations of Alexandria in 34 BC. Then, of course, comes the climax of the conflict at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, and finally Octavian being crowned Augustus in 27 BC. In a mere blink of historical time, the world was forever changed. The immediate aftermath of Caesar's death gave rise to what we call the Second Triumvirate. Basically, three men emerged from all that chaos to seize control. You had Mark Antony, Caesar's most trusted, battle-hardened general; Lepidus, who was kind of a lesser figure; and Octavian, Caesar's 18-year-old adopted heir. Now, Octavian was just a kid with a name that almost nobody in Rome took seriously at the time. Together, they formed a formal alliance, literally dividing the Roman world on a map and combining their forces to crush Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius. But here's the fatal flaw in their design. An alliance built entirely on hunting down shared enemies, it rarely survives once those enemies are actually gone.
Which brings us to Section 2, a divided Roman world, East versus West. Antony took his legions east to fight the Parthians, while Octavian stayed west to consolidate his power back in Rome. Now, what's really fascinating here is the staggering contrast between these two men. On the one hand, you've got Mark Antony in the east. He's this legendary war hero, backed by the immense, incredible wealth of Cleopatra. And on the other hand, you have Octavian back in Rome. Now, Octavian isn't the physical specimen or the military giant that Antony is, not at all. But Octavian is something far more dangerous. He is an absolute master of politics, patience, and cold calculation.
Let's move to part 3, the propaganda war, or winning with words. You see, Octavian realized a fundamental truth of power. Wars could be won with words long before swords were ever drawn. While Antony was living it up, living lavishly in the East, Octavian was waging an absolute masterclass of a propaganda war right in the Roman Forum. He completely weaponized public opinion. He painted Antony not as a fellow Roman, but as this corrupted, bewitched shell of a man who had abandoned his homeland for a foreign queen. And Octavian's greatest ammunition? That came in 34 BC, during an event known as the Donations of Alexandria. In this incredibly lavish, golden ceremony in Egypt, Antony literally gave away the store. To truly grasp the sheer audacity of this, you have to picture Mark Antony actually dressing himself up as the Greek god Dionysus during the ceremony. He named Cleopatra the Queen of Kings and just started distributing Roman-conquered territories directly to her and their children as client rulers. I mean, to the Egyptian court, it was a magnificent celebration. But to Octavian back in Rome, it was the ultimate political gift. He spun this specific event to the Roman public as a massive, unforgivable betrayal of the Republic.
So, the crucial point is what Octavian does next, his absolute masterpiece of manipulation. In a highly questionable legal maneuver, Octavian dramatically unseals what he claims is Mark Antony's private will and reads it out loud to a completely shocked Roman Senate. Whether it was true or completely fabricated, the document claimed Antony wanted to be buried in Egypt beside Cleopatra, and it gave even more Roman land to her heirs.
The scandal worked perfectly. It allowed the Senate to strip Antony of his powers. But here's the genius part. They declared war on Cleopatra. Octavian framed it not as a civil war between Romans, but as Rome valiantly defending itself against a foreign threat. Which leads us straight into part 4, strategy at Actium. The swords are finally drawn. Both sides gather their massive forces on the coast of Greece in 31 BC, setting the stage for the climax of this incredible conflict that's going to decide the fate of the Roman world.
The two fleets assembled on the water were built for entirely different kinds of warfare. Antony and Cleopatra brought an enormous fleet of massive, heavy warships. We're talking heavily armored vessels designed for brute strength and boarding enemy ships. Octavian, however, had a brilliant admiral on his side named Marcus Agrippa. And Agrippa prepared a much leaner, faster fleet for Octavian. His ships were built for pure speed and maneuverability. They were meant to strike fast and withdraw, rather than getting bogged down in a sluggish wrestling match out on the water.
Let's see how this builds, because Antony anchored his fleet in what looked like a really strong position, the Gulf of Ambracia. But Agrippa countered with this grueling, 4-step slow siege. First, he blockaded the narrow entrance to the Gulf. Second, he completely cut off Antony's supply lines. Third, he simply waited. As the weeks dragged on, malaria and dysentery spread like wildfire through Antony's trapped camp. Undernourished soldiers lost morale, and Roman officers started quietly deserting to Octavian's side. In this 4-step 4, Antony had to make an impossible choice. He could either attempt a doomed land retreat or force a desperate breakout by sea. Cleopatra argued for the sea.
Chapter 5, Fire on the Water. The battle begins. On the morning of September 2nd, 31 BC, the fleets finally clash in open water. Banners are raised, drums are beating across the waves. Interestingly, Cleopatra's squadron, which is carrying the massive war chest and treasury, waits in reserve behind the main battle line, just watching to see how the chaos is going to unfold. For hours, the battle is just this grinding, exhausting stalemate. But then, the turning points rapidly cascade. Agrippa deploys fire missiles, absolutely devastating Antony's slower, heavily armored ships, because they just can't maneuver away in the crowded lines. Seeing the fire and the shifting tides, Cleopatra's reserve squadron unexpectedly raises full sail and flees south. And, bringing us full circle to our opening hook, Antony sees her leaving, abandons his fighting men, and jumps on a smaller ship to follow her. Left totally leaderless, Antony's mighty fleet collapses, burns, and eventually surrenders in a completely humiliating rout. Section 6. The Death of the Republic. The aftermath of Actium is a tragic and incredibly rapid collapse. Antony and Cleopatra make a subdued, humiliating retreat back to Egypt, their military strength completely shattered. Octavian methodically pursues them. Within a year, his forces march right into Alexandria. Facing certain defeat and isolated in the royal palace, Mark Antony takes his own life. Shortly after, absolutely refusing to be paraded through Rome as a conquered trophy in chains, Cleopatra chooses to end her own life as well in her quiet chambers. The sheer scale of the fallout here was staggering. With Cleopatra's death, Egypt's majestic 3,000-year line of pharaohs simply ends, and the kingdom becomes just another Roman province. With his rivals finally gone, Octavian is the last man standing after decades of civil war. 4 years later, he is granted a new name, Augustus. He becomes Rome's first true emperor, ruling an empire that would endure for the next 500 years.
There's this quote from the source material that captures exactly why this matters so deeply to us today. The republic that Brutus and Cassius had killed Caesar to save was gone for good. What you should really take away from this explainer is how incredibly fragile democratic traditions truly are. The Roman Republic wasn't destroyed by massive outside invaders breaching the walls. It was dismantled from within. It fell through manufactured scandal, the manipulation of public fear, political power vacuums, and personal ambitions that placed ultimate power above the republic itself. Which leads us with a final, fascinating question to ponder. When we look back at the ashes of Rome's democratic traditions, what was the true fatal blow? Did Mark Antony lose the republic because he was blinded by love and personal desire? Or did Octavian brilliantly conquer it by weaponizing propaganda and lies? It's a debate that historians still argue over today, and one that makes the story of Actium so eternally captivating. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you a whole new perspective on the fall of Rome.